Welcome to the DesignRush podcast. I'm your host, Vianca Mayer. Today we're joined by Mitch Joel, founder of Thinkers One, to delve into the nuances of impostor syndrome, the integration of AI in B2B content creation, and the complexities of outsourcing.
It's hard because a lot of times we're hiring the person, which we think makes sense. Like, oh, well, we get along with them, so that would be good. But sometimes that person doesn't necessarily have the skills to deliver.
Research shows that imposter syndrome affects up to 80% of people, including high achievers like CEOs and industry leaders. Mitch shares his personal journey for realizing his thought leadership status only recently, despite 2 decades in the industry.
So I don't know if I consider it the value of thought leadership so much as I've been devaluing the skills that help me communicate what I learn and think about in a way that I hope is both cogent and pleasing to some type of audience.
We also explore the transformative power of generative AI and content creation. Mitch discusses how AI tools like ChatGPT are not just part of the hype cycle, but essential to modern business practices.
If you're not really engaging with these tools, it becomes part of this weird hype cycle. And for me, it's not part of the hype cycle. It literally is a function of the work that I do.
Mitch elaborates on training AI to offer opposing viewpoints, significantly enhancing the quality of his work.
Now imagine if I had somehow trained GPT to be not evil Mitch, but the opposing Mitch. And that I've told it and showed it all the work that I do and how I think. But I've also trained it to think like a very strategic media theorist so that whatever I input into it, it would give me an opposing or different perspective.
Finally, we discuss the critical aspects of outsourcing in today's business environment, emphasizing the importance of balancing personality and price with actual skill and delivery.
It's all about engaging with agency partners, which we know is a more expensive strategy, but it just keeps us sane. Meaning I don't have somebody here asking me what to do today. I can just pass that off to agency work.
Remember to like and subscribe to stay updated with all of our conversations with industry leaders. Let's get started. Mitch, a very warm welcome again to the DesignRush podcast. It's wonderful having you here with us today, finally, after some of the reschedulings that we've had to do.
Not a problem. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Mitch, I found quite a bit of information about you online. I mean, I know that you're a leading keynote speaker and you're a best-selling author, and you're also a go-to source for what's now and next for industry giants like Google and TikTok and even Shopify. I just wonder, Mitch, when was the moment that you realized, damn, I'm a thought leader, people want to hear from me, and what did that feel like for you?
If I'm being really honest, I think it only occurred a couple of months ago. And I'm not even being facetious or joking. I was very head down and running the business of an agency. I was very head down and thinking that every action I take is somehow related to building that agency. So if I was speaking, it was much easier to do that than going door to door to organizations and seeing if they required digital marketing services. If I was writing, again, early days of blog posts or doing a podcast or even appearing in a podcast like we're doing now, my general thing would always be, let's make sure I stay on target to talk specifically about the work we do at the agency and how I can best do that, in the hopes that there's a halo effect, that the more I talk about it, the more people, when they think of the challenges they have, oh yeah, I saw Mitch talk about that and we should reach out to his agency. What happened recently is I was driving back from a keynote presentation that I gave. It was about a 2-hour drive to the airport. And I was reflecting on it. It was only about 200 people, small room, one organization. And I thought, wow, the CEO was very uncomfortable speaking in public, which is very common, by the way. And there are other team members that were up there and doing weird things in terms of presentation skills, and it's not their core. And people really enjoyed my conversation. And I was wondering if it was because of the content or because of how I do it. And what I realized is I take for granted, or I've taken for granted for close to 20 years, if not a little bit more, that it's not easy to get up and speak in front of an audience and make it look very, very easy. That it's not easy to get on a podcast like this without preparation and have to really reflect and think live and in real time and communicate that in a way where I don't have a lot of vocal tics or I'm not boring, then hopefully I'm engaging. People want to connect with that. And so in that 2.5 hour car ride back to the airport, I realized that maybe I had been undervaluing all of this work that I put into these skills that not only do I take for granted, but the problem with my skills is that the vast majority of people who see them, just in seeing them, think, oh, that looks really easy. I could probably do that. And then reflecting on, well, I've been interviewing thousands and thousands of people since the late 80s, that in and of itself is a skill. That how do you create and prepare for a conversation? That in and of itself is a skill. Creating my slide deck, creating the stories and working the stories so that they sound good and natural and relevant to an audience. I had been devaluing that. So I don't know if I consider it the value of thought leadership so much as I had been devaluing the skills that help me communicate what I learn and think about in a way that I hope is both cogent and pleasing to some type of audience. So that's more where I've been lately is I feel like maybe I shouldn't devalue that or just assume that everyone else can do it, because that's what I did. I just assumed everyone else could do it. They can't.
Okay, so Mitch, just to shift the conversation a little bit now, because there are some questions that I have to ask you on just the trains and the bigger brands and stuff that you've worked with. So I'm wondering, how can B2B companies effectively, say for instance, integrate AI tools like ChatGPT or Descript into their content creation process based on your experience thus far?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear and full disclosure, just because I'm asked to speak, which is what I am asked to do often, and some of these people are definitely clients for the agency, but it's a lot of hype and marketing, just to be very transparent about that. So yeah, I've done a lot of events speaking for organizations like that, but it's not like I have ongoing mandates where they see me as some type of person to see the future. They're doing, way more extensive work and have way more information than little old me has, for sure. There is no doubt that there's a lot of hype around generative AI. I think AI is a bit different from what we're seeing in the generative AI tools, which is things like ChatGPT and Descript and other platforms. It's very hard to not understand at its core that if you have work that you're doing that required an advanced degree in school, let's say, or let's say your work also requires that you've gotten very good at the work that you create and output, but it's quite repetitive. And all you really do is copy paste, meaning new client comes in, you do that type of work for them, and then you learn from that and get better at it. And the next client comes in and you sell them those similar types of things. The output is always different, but that generative AI eats that stuff for breakfast. So that's the first challenge, is that I think a lot of the scare and worry is that it's coming for the knowledge workers, that it is automated or made the work that we do much easier to do. And the truth is, as someone who plays with these tools a lot, it's done a lot of replacing of me, which I'm okay with, because there's still the taste component of it, the humanness of it. I can still play with it. I'm more of an editor than I am a creator, more of a curator than I am of a generator. I've become okay with that. And I think I'm okay with that because I'm not starting out. I don't have to worry about validating my work to the boss. I don't have to worry about somebody in an Excel sheet crossing out my salary and me being fired. So I'm in a much more privileged space than the vast majority of people are. But when it comes to that type of work, I just can't imagine anybody not understanding or working with it to see the power of it, both what customers will see when they engage with you, in particular at a B2B level, and even more importantly, perhaps what's happening underneath it behind the scenes to make the work more effective and cost effective. So the immediate concern is, well, it's going to really impact employment and we're going to no longer need to hire juniors, or we can be redundant here. For some people, I believe that to be true. But ultimately, if you're not really engaging with these tools, it becomes part of this weird hype cycle. And for me, it's not part of the hype cycle. It literally is a function of the work that I do. So one quick example. If I'm being asked to provide some insight on something, typically I have my insight, I put it together in a package. It could be a PowerPoint deck, it could be an article, it could be a white paper, whatever it might be. But a lot of that work is, it's somewhat emotional, meaning I believe in the work that I have. I believe my perspective is unique. Now imagine if I had somehow trained GPT to be not evil Mitch, but the opposing Mitch. And that I've told it and showed it all the work that I do and how I think. But I've also trained it to think like a very strategic media theorist so that whatever I input into it, it would give me an opposing or different perspective. I've done that. And so the work that I'm creating, I feel is so much stronger because I'm able to see the parts that somebody else who would think differently than I would pick away at it. So that makes my final output, whether it's that slide, that presentation, or that white paper, so much more powerful because I'm essentially rebuttaling against all potential opposition to it or objections to it. So even just for that, from like a B2B sales perspective, and again, because I see how it does it so well, I'm a victim of a lot of the marketing from B2B organizations. And I'm always amazed at how many gaps they'll leave in their thinking when they don't have to do that anymore. So that's just one little example.
Well, listen, that's a brilliant way to think about it. I mean, I've had a few people on the show, of course, that have spoken about, you know, the use of AI, especially recently, actually, because it is such a buzzword, and like we said, like it's sort of a hype train now. But of course, the people that I have had on the show so far, just like you, it's not a hype. It's something that they are integrating into their lives and building their businesses from as well, and successfully, might I add.
Yeah.
First of all, I agree with you that I think most writers are going to be editors if they aren't already. I actually had Tim Hansen from Pain Friend on the show, where he basically said, I am taking people's jobs with my AI writer, but it's only the bad writers, you know. But any case, again, I digress. But what I wanted to say was that I think at the end of the day, these brilliant sort of ideas of how we can use AI to enhance what we already know, what we're already doing. Like, for instance, you saying that you trained your AI to do something opposing or kind of challenge what you say so that you can think even further past the original idea that you had is brilliant. I haven't heard of that before. I'm going to start doing that now too.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing with it. It's a bit. I always say it's parlor magic, and we're showing people how the magic trick works. So it's a bit of a sleight of hand because it's not hard to do. And once I talk about it, everybody does it, so it becomes commoditized. So just like that individual talking about, I'm taking the job away from bad writers. My question is, how long will it be before it's mediocre or medium rated writers and then great writers? If we're constantly doing this, and it's not just that individual, it's all of us that are doing this. So that's more of the short-term concern, would be that it does get to the point where we have somehow created this. And then I worry more about the output, right? Because the output means that all we're really doing is having AI talk to AI. And what does that look like? And I don't know the answer to that. It's an immediate grumble of like, ugh, that would be gross if like your LinkedIn was essentially everyone's AI talking to everyone's AI. But maybe what that means is we've grown very fatigued of the need to be on LinkedIn. And so we have to think about what comes after that. So what happens is we'll often take the idea and apply it to the model of today, not realizing that that's not really what happens in technology and innovation. What happens is we iterate towards a new model and that new things come from that. So we are always very responsive to this based off of this weird notion of, well, we're just going to replace ourselves. I mean, I guess so, but did blogging really replace great article writing or great news writing? It didn't, and that's been 2 decades now of it. In fact, I think if all it did is it created a lot of writers, some of their voices became more prominent, but the vast majority of people realized, oh, I'm not good at writing, and they don't blog anymore. So that led to something. What did it lead to? Well, it led to things like more agile news outlets. It led to newspapers. It led to Substack. It led to companies like MailChimp and Squarespace. Like, all of that's very interesting and very good. So I don't panic about it because I always know that when we have this replacement, it's not like LinkedIn dies. It's that something else becomes more useful or more personal in that. And that's where I think the opportunity is.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Shifting a little bit now, I wonder, I want to pick your brain on this as well. With the shift towards, holistic customer experiences, what would you say are the strategies like that brands like Starbucks or Shopify are using to enhance their customer journeys with AI?
What I could say is that the manifestation and development of all of these technologies have brought us to a place where if we ask questions like that, we're going to get crappy answers for our business. What do I mean by that? In a world where we have text, images, audio, video, in a world where we understand our customers better than most of the times historically than we ever have. In fact, I could even argue that with AI, we're going to see synthetic data. So I won't need to capture the data of all of my customers. I could just have it be generating synthetic data that is very resonant to that. What that means is that all of us who are developing platforms for businesses now have the ability to personalize it, in particular, not to the customer, but to our needs. That's the real power here. We're not all shooting for the same advertising output. You do a banner ad, I do a banner ad. You do a billboard, I do a billboard. You do radio, I do radio. I might be in a place where you and I are selling the same type of B2B software, but I am focused primarily on an audio podcast as my channel to engage because I've found an audience and that's what I'm using. You might look at that and say, we could never create a podcast that works. Well, how is that? We're both in B2B, we're both in software, we're both selling it the same way in the same channels. And the answer is because we have this proliferation of tools and abilities to connect to customers in different ways, we're finding our own unique ways that work for our customer base. That to me is the magic sauce. The magic sauce is that all of these case studies and all of these white papers that we read are not replicable. In fact, I often argue that success in these situations is often the anomaly, that if you even try to do this and copy it, it probably wouldn't work for you, that there was something else happening there. So the trick and the opportunity is one is you can find that something else that's unique to you, and you have all of the tools and channels and operatives to do that in a world where typically you couldn't because they were either unaffordable, didn't exist, or there were gatekeepers. So it's a rethinking of what you're saying, which is instead of being like, what are the 4 things everybody uses to create great customer experiences? I would say back to you, what if there were 1 million and you can choose 2? Isn't that cooler? And that's where we have to think, like, forget what you're seeing. Start thinking about it very strategically. What do our customers want? And what can we be great at delivering for them? And guess what? You can do that now. That's just content. Think about a mobile application. Think about a web experience. Think about physical activations. All of this is there, and it's pretty reasonable in comparison to how we used to do these things. And that's what makes this moment in time so good. So anyone who's like, oh, keywords are too expensive, or Google's getting tired, or what's going to happen when AI, I'm like, I don't think you're even looking at the opportunity, which is the fact that you as a 2-person business can market the same way a $50 billion business did 20 years ago. That's unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. I wanted to get to that as well, actually. But first of all, I just want to ask you then, in that case, what is like a recent example that you've seen a B2B business really use disruption to its advantage?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a specific case. And the reason I don't have a specific case is because I suffer from agency ownership. And here's what I learned as an agency owner. And by the way, at the same time, I was a social media person creating content and I was speaking. Is I would get up on stages and all of my peers would talk about brands like Apple and Nike and Google. And I realized they never worked with those companies, actually. In fact, they read an article, which is essentially hype and PR, and then used it as some type of case study. When behind the scenes, we were working with actual clients on ongoing digital mandates, and some stuff I could speak about publicly, other stuff I couldn't. I had to also be careful because I didn't want to make it look like we're selling our services. But what I did see, and what I would tell audiences, and what I'll share with you, is that often when you're working in it, it looks nothing like the case study you see after. It looks nothing like the award we won for it, the learnings, what happened, how did we learn that, how did we get there? Often we don't know any of those stories. So I could say to you, oh, I saw this company do this amazing thing and it was really attractive to me. But to even say that, I feel like it fundamentally diminishes the actual work. So without having worked on it, it'd be hard for me to do that. And the fact that I sold my business 10 years ago and haven't worked in an agency in 5 years, I have no clue. So I'm very cautious about using case studies like that. Here's what I can tell you, though, that is true. And it's an example of an organization we all know. And I typically avoid organizations like that. But if you look at something like Apple, you say, so what has been Apple's greatest way in which they've engaged with consumers and You might talk about things like, I don't even know, actually, maybe the Apple Vision Pro was a bust. Maybe this didn't happen. I'd say, sure. But if you look at the actual money they're generating and the best flow of that money, it's coming from services, the services that they're creating. So you might go, well, of course, they have Apple Music or podcasts or whatever. You might say that, but how many B2B marketers have fundamentally looked at the services that they're offering? So if you sell services, what are the services on top of those services? If you're selling products, have you looked at selling services? Those are the types of things that I would say, not because Apple was successful or this is how they did it, but there is a there that we undervalue the power of services and how they can be not just revenue generators, they can retain customers, they help customers from churning. Things like that are more interesting to me than just, oh, this brand did something cute and I believe it worked, but maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know the truth. I don't know.
Okay. So again, just as AI is becoming more integrated with business operations as well, what are the biggest like shady or unethical things that you've seen happen with regards to B2B businesses integrating AI, and what should they be careful of?
Yeah, I don't know that it's shady. It's really, one is making sure that you have policies and security in place. What I've seen a lot lately is I shouldn't say none of them. Many organizations don't have it as their own licensed version that's secure. And whether they do or don't, because they don't have policies in place, their salespeople, their business development people, their marketing people are using the open version of it. And by using the open version of it, they're essentially putting IP into the engine. I would be very cautious of people that are trying to do work more effectively or cut corners, whatever it might be, and inputting a lot of data into the public system. One, because they could be breaching their employee contract, their confidentiality. I'm not sure where people stand with that. So one is, we have to understand that is core first, is locking it down in the sense of giving them access to it through the proper channel so that they're not constantly feeding IP into the machine that both their competitors will see or anybody can use and access. And two would be, it's a bit of a replacement strategy, which I don't like. It's letting it do the work because the work is good enough. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but the idea that if I had a sales proposal due tomorrow, that I could, with a couple of very simple prompt, get it to a place where it would be better than my peers and I could do it in 4 seconds versus a couple of hours. Again, I don't think it's there to create for me. I think it is there right now to co-pilot with me. But that takes a lot of learning. And while organizations are getting there, they're not there yet.
Yeah, exactly. Mitch, okay, so just shifting the conversation a little bit now, I do want to talk more about outsourcing with you, especially with regards to, B2B agencies and stuff like that. But first of all, I want to ask, who was the first massive company that approached you to help them with their business strategy?
Who was the first big one? It was either Scotiabank or TELUS. And in Canada, TELUS would be one of the largest mobile providers, telecommunications. Scotiabank would be one of the top 5 banks. So it was one of those two. It was a bit of a race to see who was there first. And both of those came because I was very involved at the time in the Canadian Marketing Association, which would be our national association. I was on the digital council and was speaking a lot and producing a lot of content. So it was, it just shows you that the social media aspect worked to drive clients back then.
Okay. And how would you say that experience really propelled your personal brand and business to where it is today?
Yeah, I don't have that business anymore, so I sold it. So I think it worked. It worked in terms of us creating, a really valuable business that had great clients that we were doing great work for. There was always a challenge in that, from the work that I was doing publicly versus the work we were doing as an agency, and really making sure those stayed connected, that it wasn't just this one person doing it, because it wasn't. It was a full team. And ultimately the work and the team that you surround yourself is going to be the result. So we had not only great clients, but we had great teams, and we were coming up with good ideas. That's the trifecta you want in any type of agency model or work. Again, we were very fortunate. It didn't work with everybody, and these weren't relationships that lasted forever. But at the time, they helped us learn. We were able to learn from the work. The clients were able to learn and grow. And we were there when the industry was really evolving. So it was very powerful.
Okay, very cool. Mitch, just on the topic of outsourcing as well, based on your experiences, what would you say business owners really need to pay attention to when they are choosing the right, business strategy or agency or consultant to help them, choose the right one?
It's hard. It's hard because a lot of times we're hiring the person, which we think makes sense. Like, oh, well, we get along with them, so that would be good. But sometimes that person doesn't necessarily have the skills to deliver. And so you're looking for that balance of somebody who you both want to work with, that you want to be in the room with, and also has that level of delivery so that you're not being uh, wooed by just the personality and the smartness and the wow. And it's not easy to find. I have to tell you, we have this new startup Thinkers One, and part of what we're doing here is outsourcing everything. We don't really have any employees. It's all about engaging with agency partners, which we know is a more expensive strategy, but it just keeps us sane. Meaning, I don't have somebody here asking me what to do today. I can just pass that off to agency work. And it's been fascinating to be on the other side and pitch agencies and speak to people and engage with them and see how much has changed in 10 years, how much hasn't changed in 10 years. And it's something we grapple with, where people are very eloquent and they present very well. And then you get into the work and it's okay. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It's okay. Then you meet people who you're not sure and you give them a chance and they're head down and doing the work. And you think, oh, that's interesting. And I reflect back on the fact that we had many agency partners, we had many freelancers and people who worked in the spaces and not in the spaces. Some were good, some weren't good. I don't know that anybody has cracked the code on what makes a great partner. You want to make sure you could work with them. You want to make sure that they can deliver, and you want to make sure that what they deliver is a notch above what you would be able to do yourself. What does that look like for everybody in every industry and every personality type? I have no clue, but it is a constant challenge.
What is the biggest mistakes you've seen businesses actually make when they've outsourced to an agency, would you say?
They're hiring for the personality. They're hiring because they've seen results from a white paper or examples from the past from another business. The biggest one is they're usually hiring on price. Price is a pretty bad one. I've seen people for not a lot of money deliver great results, and I've seen people you pay a ton of money to and there's not great results. So you have to figure out, what the right balance is there. Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard question to answer because I always find myself looking at everything as project based. So the only advice I could give, which I'm just completely stealing, I think from Seth Godin, is I believe he wrote somewhere, I don't know if I want to work with you until I work with you. So what does that mean? Maybe it means instead of putting up an RFP and having you do a bunch of free work and then me choosing one person out of a whole cattle call of people, what if I gave 2 or 3 agencies a real project with real money and saw what the results were? So now we're working together. I'm paying you what you want to be paid. And I'm trying to figure out in that moment if I want to pay you more, what the results are. I like that approach a lot more. It seems to be the one working best. And it does seem to weed out a lot of the partners that don't work with that. It takes, you're spending money and time on these things, but that's what it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I also find the hardest is when you are outsourcing. I mean, people can say anything they want really on a white paper or on case studies. I mean, I know that there's a lot of fabrication and stuff like that there.
Yeah, pay them.
So I wonder, have you ever come across like blatant telltale signs that there's a fabrication there with regards to case studies that people maybe have on their sites or white papers or anything?
I think we all overhype, as I was clear in admitting to today, that it's not that I get calls all day from Shopify and Starbucks. It's that they were doing an event and they wanted me to speak to their audience. They call me and it's great. And hopefully they call me back and that's quite lovely.
Sure.
I jokingly cut you off and I apologize, but I said pay them. And it is true that if you think somebody is going to do what they claimed in a case study for you and you like everything you're hearing, do a couple $1,000 project with them. And then see. You'll know very quickly how quickly they respond, how quickly you get a contract, how quickly you're set up in their payment, how quickly they get things going, where the ideas are coming from, how are they engaging with you with client service. I mean, in the span of 3 days, I got the beat. I know how this is going to play out. And look, I can even forego all of that if the result is amazing on top of that. Usually, those first few things are very telling, and they usually mean what we think they mean.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a very good way to look at it, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Give them
Mitch,
money and say, here's a mandate. You'll know right away whether they're good or bad.
Mitch, we're going to start wrapping up now. Thank you so much for everything that we've discussed today. I feel like I could talk to you for even longer, to be honest. Like, there's a lot that I'd love to hear more about, but of course we only have you for an hour. But before I let you go, Mitch, there's just one question that I'd like to ask you still, and that is, if you could make one digital trend illegal going forward, what would it be and why?
Oh, I think without a question, it's spam. Spam macros. Spam micro would be, in particular, having the ability to send anything through the in or chat box on LinkedIn. I know, and I've spoken to people who want to do that for us at Thinkers One and tell us how effective it is because it's so targeted. I've never in the history of LinkedIn, and I've been on it since day one, ever had one of those come in and felt like I really want to connect with that person. And in fact, when I tell them I don't want to and they keep at it, it gets even worse and uglier. So that's a very petty personal one, but I think that would be the one.
No, that's a good one to have, I would say, for sure.
Stay out of my inbox.
Yeah, exactly. Mitch, thank you so much again for joining us on the DesignRush podcast today. It was absolutely wonderful having you, really.
I appreciate it, and so great meeting you.
And that's a wrap on our episode with Mitch Joel. If your project could benefit from a top-tier agency's expertise, look no further than designrush.com/marketplace. Our carefully curated selection of agencies is equipped to help you navigate the digital world, from web design to marketing to bring your vision to life. Remember to like and subscribe for more engaging chats with industry leaders. Again, I'm your host, Vianca Mayer. Stay curious and join us for the next episode.